Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am Dr. Gill Barham, and you are listening to an episode of the Radiant Menopause podcast. And today, listen up, we're talking about vaginas. Oh my goodness me, yes, I said that word out loud. So ladies, this is such an important subject to discuss because it is a big elephant in the room. It's estimated that 80%, up to 80% of women will suffer with vaginal dryness, particularly as they get at the other side of the menopause, as you might term it, or post-menopausally. So vaginal dryness, or vaginal atrophy as it's known, is where the vagina shrinks and all of the area around the vagina actually shrinks and atrophies. That's dries up. That's the whole thing that it means. So the vagina not only shrinks towards each other, but also shortens as well. And what can happen too is that it affects the urethra, so the bit that you pee out of at the front and the bit that you poo out of the back as well. There's a whole kind of underneath pelvic floor area that is affected by this dryness. And it's thought that the majority of women who develop this will develop it post-menopausally, but for some women, it's actually the first thing that happens to them. And, you know, I'm going to be talking to you about this whole thing about vaginal atrophy, but the person that has brought this more to the fore than anybody else is a lady called Jane Lewis, and she has a wonderful book called My Menopause Vagina. She runs a Facebook group, she does Instagram posts. So if this is you, although I am going to talk about it today, and ultimately she's a really super busy lady, I would love to be able to get her on and talk to her and, you know, get some questions for you so that she can answer them for you. But, you know, she's in big demand at the moment, so for the moment that's not possible. So I'm going to try and kind of do my own bit about it as much as I know. Now, you know, why is it important to me, you might say? Well, if you've listened to the previous podcast, you will know that I have been in the menopause roughly for 15 to 20 years. My first hot flush when I was 39, and I am now 59. And I have been trying to manage my menopause through functional medicine, through natural herbs and remedies, through lifestyle changes, for developing more spiritual awareness, and all of that has definitely worked. But the biggest problem I had was sleeping. And so that was a big issue for me for many, many years. And I've really only recently been able to overcome this problem, despite everything that I've been doing, by just using a couple of pumps of estradiol, natural, kind of as much as you can, body identical HRT. But the other thing that happened that prompted me to finally go and get over myself about HRT and to really understand what modern day HRT is like was the fact that I developed vaginal atrophy. I didn't know about it, even though I'm a former nurse. I'm not a medical doctor, by the way, you should know that. I'm a former nurse. I've been in the functional nutrition world for many, many years in the wellness field. You know, it's typical, isn't it? Unless you experience something yourself, you don't really necessarily know about it, even though you would think it would be my job. But actually, it's really only in the past, I don't know, probably a year. And to be honest with you, it was so gradual that I didn't really realize what was going on. All I knew were things like, you know, I had a loss of libido, but just assumed that was because of the drop in hormones. I didn't want to have sex, and I then couldn't have penetrative sex, certainly. And then things started to happen, like I was getting urinary symptoms, like I was peeing a little bit. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm a Pilates teacher, and I do pelvic floor exercises, so I was a little bit confused. I've had all my babies via cesarean section, so my pelvic floor is actually really healthy. I wasn't getting urinary tract infections, but I was getting a bit of a smell as well. Really not quite sure what's going on. I was getting a bit embarrassed. You know, I didn't want to be the person that had the old lady wee smell. which is the smell that I used to smell when I was nursing geriatric patients. So there were all those kind of things were going on, and it really, there was a big awakening when I finally realized what was going on. And I started to do my research about what I could do about this, if anything. And of course, then I discovered that there was something that I could do, but that all of the things that I'd been taught about doing things naturally, from Jane's book, reading My Menopause Vagina, and from the myriad of other women and menopause doctors that have experiencing this, that it was very, very clear that this is a complete symptom of estrogen withdrawal. And that, yes, I could use sea buckthorn, omega-7. Yes, I could use vaginal moisturizers and lubricants. Yes, I could, obviously make sure that I was taking other general omegas to try and plump everything or keep everything going. But there wasn't anything other than a topical estrogen that was going to actually plump the tissues back up, that was going to make all of that area function even remotely normally again. So this vaginal atrophy, what's really interesting about it is that, one of the symptoms of the menopause, obviously, is for some women is dry skin. So I'd already been suffering with a dry eye. So sometimes you'll see me, if you're watching this rather than listening, I wipe this right eye a lot because I've got a dry eye. My skin was drying up. I was getting, much flakier skin. My feet were in agony sometimes. I was getting cracked skin on my feet. And I was thinking this was, trying to put in loads of omegas because that's what really helps dry skin. Nothing was really working. But of course, what was happening on the outside was also happening on the inside. Because your skin is actually the window. This is the shop floor, if you like. Your skin is the thing that will tell you. And when I work with women and perhaps they've got things like acne or psoriasis, is that I will always go internally into the gut and say, what's going on with your gut? Because the skin is the window showing you there's something amiss. It's a bit like a flashing light on your dashboard of your car, if you like. So what I needed to do was to really understand exactly what was going on and what I needed to do about it that fitted in with my views about taking what I saw to be medication. So I'm going to talk to you about what I eventually decided to do. But what's really interesting about this is that the more I started to look at vaginal atrophy, the more I realised that it was quite a complicated subject, that many women were having similar symptoms, but actually there were other things that were, other conditions that were like it. So things like lichen sclerosis, vulvodynia, and Jane talks about this a lot in her book, and that actually GPs are really quite unaware of it, that it's something that puts women off going and having cervical smears, because the thought of having a thing inserted in your vagina so that they can do a cervical smear was just, no thank you, I'm not having that, thank you very much. And dermatologists know a little bit more about it, but very often they will be prescribing steroid creams. So it's, it is a bit of a misunderstood situation really here. And one of the biggest signs of it really, particularly for post-menopausal women, I think, and for elderly women, is that they will be getting recurrent urinary tract infections, being treated with repeated amounts of antibiotics. Now, if you know me and you know my love of the microbiome, you will know that antibiotics are the one thing that is the biggest cause of dysbiosis or imbalance in the gut microbiome, which in turn will create a metabolic dysbiosis or a metabolic imbalance, which then can lead to things like diabetes and heart disease and cancer and, chronic illness. So every time we have some antibiotics for a urinary tract infection, we are actually creating a body imbalance, if you like. So we've got probably thousands and thousands of elderly women who are, sitting at home or sitting in nursing homes with vaginal dryness, that are in their 80s, 70s, 80s and 90s, that have been without any HRT, any estrogen since they were probably 50. 51 is the average age of the last solar period. And they must be absolutely, A, in agony, and B, really susceptible to disease, and particularly to low immunity. Now, this is really important, because if you have a microbiome, if you have a gut imbalance, it means that your immunity is much lower, because 90% of your immunity sits in your gut. So if you're having this disruption all of the time, it means that your immunity lowers. And of course, I'm recording this on the 5th of July. We are 14 weeks into lockdown. Where are we seeing the most deaths by COVID? In the elderly population. And that means that, those people have lowered immune systems. Is it just because they are older? Yes, of course. But is it also because a lot of elderly people, and let's talk about elderly women, they are being given repeated amounts of urinary tract salves, if you like, or symptomatic relief of repeated urinary tract infections, which may actually be coming from vaginal atrophy. And I know that Dr. Louise Newson and Jane Lewis and another lady called Diane Danzebrick, who are all doing these big campaigns. My friend Claire Shepherd, who is a nutritionist, and another lady that I will be interviewing as well, her friend Elizabeth, who have got a poster campaign going on, all of us raising awareness about the menopause, means that, we have to be more aware of how this is affecting half the population. This affects all women. The menopause affects all women. Vaginal atrophy doesn't affect all women, but it affects 70 or to 80%. So this is a very big area, really. And what happens is that with urinary tract infections is that women are given short doses of antibiotics, but actually what happens is that these infections become embedded in the bladder. And so somebody that will know their salt will give much longer term doses of antibiotics, and then actually treat the cause of this. So they'll treat the symptom, but then they'll treat the cause of this, which is replacing the estrogen to that part of the body that needs it. So there are creams, for example, there are pessaries, and I use at the moment a Vagifem Pessary, which is a tiny, tiny little thing with an applicator that either goes low down or high up, depending on where you want it to be. And it delivers a tiny, tiny amount of this. And if I don't have a uterus, as you probably have heard, some women do, and they would need a bit of micronized progesterone as well, a natural progesterone, which is now derived from yams, for example, to balance, those hormones out. But the great thing about this is it's thought not to go, it doesn't go through the liver, so it's not causing as many problems as a pill that you would take. It's going directly into the area that needs it. And I kid you not, I went onto a loading dose, which is what you do for a couple of weeks. And within, I don't know, just a few days, I noticed the most massive difference. I got to the stage where I couldn't sit in a car for very long. I couldn't understand what was going on. I was so uncomfortable. I couldn't wear tight clothing. Jeans were, I'm really not going there. And all the other issues as well. But, just the day-to-day things, going for a walk became so uncomfortable. And some women have these things much more dramatically than I do. And Jane's story is extraordinary, because it was, for her, she was one of the women, it was the first symptom for her. And so she is kind of, she's the expert on how she has managed her own vaginal atrophy. And it's, everybody talks about it in the family, everybody knows about it. And, a lot of us as women, we might breast examine, But the majority of women don't even look at their vulva, which is the outside area. The vagina is actually the bit inside, before you get to the cervix. A lot of women don't look at it even. They're not familiar with it. So if you're not familiar with it, how do you expect a GP or a specialist to know what's normal for you? If you're not familiar with what's normal for you, how are they supposed to know? I mean, they will have a good idea, but you're the best person to determine that. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do, like, trying to do breast examinations every month, is get a mirror and have a look down below and look at what's going on. Notice how the skin is. Is it plump and moist? Is it dried up? Is it red? Is it angry? What is actually going on down there? So we talked about creams, we talked about pessaries. There is also a ring that you can kind of insert as well, that will just give a very low dose over some time. There are things like sea buckthorn, omega-7s that some people take. Some women will take a supplement called DHEA that is a kind of precursor to producing small amounts of estrogen. But what we need to understand here, because I was really ignorant about new forms of hormone replacement therapy. I had been subject, like thousands of other women, to the scare stories that come out periodically about taking hormone replacement therapy. And when I had my hysterectomy at 45, I did go on to HRT patches. And I took them, I had them for a while. And then there was another massive scare story, and I stopped using them because I was told, this was going to cause breast cancer. But actually, when I began to understand the real statistics here and to really look at all of the very positive bits of evidence that were out there, rather than on the negative bits, which of course we all love to hear, everybody loves bad news. That's what makes the news, is bad news. And I think we've been very clearly more aware of that since the COVID situation, since Brexit in the UK here as well, is that everything is doom and gloom, because that's what makes us read or watch the television or listen to the radio or whatever it is. But actually, when I began to dig down deep and to understand the real statistics, what I understood was that not only did I need to treat the local problem I had with some form of local estrogen, but I also needed to get over myself and understand that my symptoms that I've been suffering with chronically for 15 years, really chronically, at times having hot flushes every half an hour at night, having chronic sleep issues for all of that time, 13 to 15 years. I was regular as clockwork. 5 o'clock in the morning, king, I'd be awake. Looking at Chinese meridians and Chinese medicines. What is happening at 5 o'clock? Is this something to do with the poor functioning liver? Really paying attention to the way that my liver worked. Resetting my microbiome on a regular basis, doing everything that I could, getting really frustrated with myself. And actually, before I went on a more holistic approach, understanding the spiritual side of it and the mindfulness side of my whole ethos and what made me me, was I used to say things like, my body's letting me down. I feel old, and I feel that I'm never going to be the same, and that things are only just going to get worse, and that there's nothing I can do about this. And I literally looked everywhere. And in some ways, I'm not going to blame myself for this, because everything that I've learned has meant that I can now do what I do. I believe that we are on this my lifetime here at this moment is here. I'm here, and one of my purpose and my passion, and we're going to have some real good episodes on finding your passion, your purpose, finding your why, how to live a fulfilled life as a midlife woman. I really truly believe that all of the things that have happened to me over my lifestyle has given me the opportunity to be the person that I am, so that I can share the things that have happened to me that potentially can help you. I couldn't do what I do and talk about what I do if I hadn't have experienced them. And so, you know, I've come to the point actually where I've embraced all of those menopausal symptoms, and I don't feel so angry about them now. And this has taken me into a whole new part of my life. And actually, vaginal atrophy was the thing that made me reevaluate how I felt about HRT and why I needed to really think about not only what was happening to me now, but what I wanted my life to be like in the future. Because you see, for a long time, I know that the food that we eat is of such poor quality that I've been supplementing my diet for probably, I don't know, 15 years on a regular basis, on and off all the time. I went to my first naturopath when I was 19. I was doing a singing degree at the time, and I was getting some throat issues, and my singing teacher in London said, you need to go to a naturopath. So that was 40 years ago, you know, when using food as medicine was really out there then. So, you know, I've been in this world for a very, very long time, and there's a bit of a kind of, sometimes a bit of a puritanical view about medication in general. But because I also come from an allopathic world, I kind of also understand that there is a place, a time and a place for pharmaceuticals. And there is also a time and a place when nutraceuticals, you know, things that are made naturally, can be put in. And I interviewed a guy called Kevin Nevers yesterday who runs the Naked Pharmacy. That interview will be coming out, and we talk about him. You know, he started off as a conventional pharmacist, and like me, he believes that there is a place for those two things to exist together, but that there is general overuse of pharmaceuticals. We talked about the polypharmacy and what that looks like, and sometimes he would be distributing 5 pages of prescriptions to one person, and there'd be 5 things on each page, you know, and how he realized very, very quickly, because of all the side effects of all of this, that this was just going down a big hole. And so I do kind of get that there has to be a balance, and that there is a time and a place, but actually being empowered to really understand what was going on in terms of new forms of HRT. I never wanted to take Premarin, which is the one that we all talk about, which is from horses' urine. You know, they keep horses pregnant. I didn't want to get involved in all of that. These are the big scare stories. I'd also was part of this WHI study, which is the main thing that is being referred to all the time, that even GPs are so stuck in, which is this massive survey that came out with the fact that HRT causes breast cancer. You know, the study is clearly flawed. It was done on the wrong age group. It was done on a different type of HRT. And actually, it's still quoted even now. And one of the things that really helped me is reading a book called Estrogen Matters. And this is by a guy called Dr. Avron Blooming and a lady called Carol Travis. And I really, really recommend that you read that book. I'll put the references to the books that I've referred to in the show notes, and if you're watching this on video, I'll put it in video as well, so that you can go and you can educate yourself on as to what the real facts are, what the real research is to do with the safety of HRT. And at the end of the day, it is a very personal decision. But the issue is that if we understand that most GPs or most medics get very little training, if any, on the menopause, because it's not a disease. The majority of them, you know, they are wonderful people, but they have to know about everything. So if they're not really interested in the menopause, you know, they're not going to gen up on it. There is still people who really are getting to grips with it, but the information that they get out of their governing bodies, if you like, if we're going to call them that, are still contradicting what they may believe themselves. So it's very difficult for them, unless they're very brave, to really go against that formal advice, if you see what I mean. So they are up against it. So what we want to be able to do is to be able to change that paradigm so that you get a better experience. Now, I had empowered myself. So by the time I got to the stage where I knew that what I wanted to do was, in the same way that I replaced the lost magnesium out of my body because we don't have enough in our soil, the same way that I take a vitamin D supplement every day because, you know, we are all lacking in vitamin D. Why was I not replacing the estrogen that I am withdrawing from and have been for the last 40 years? Or 20 years, I should say, 20 years. You know, what was the big thing about that? And actually, that at the end of the day, it's about quality of life, not quantity of life. It's about quality of life for me. And that I knew I could not go on living with this vaginal atrophy. And so when I started looking at micronized progesterone options, looking at estrogen, I don't need the progesterone, but looking at estrogen, looking at transdermal estrogen. So I now use an estradiol gel, which I just rub on my skin a couple of pumps every morning. Looking at patches, the gel works better for me, and really understanding the risks and benefits of that. So the risks are, in general terms, if you use estrogen and progesterone, if you have a womb and you need the two, if in a year 7 women out of 1,000 are diagnosed with breast cancer, if you start to use estradiol gel, then 3 more women will be diagnosed that year. So, you know, these are kind of, I'm trying to explain it so that you'll understand. If, however, you smoke or if you drink, 3 more women will be diagnosed without any HRT. If you are overweight, 10 more women will be diagnosed every year. So you are 10 times at the risk of, or double the risk of developing breast cancer if you're overweight than if you take some HRT, which contain estrogen and progesterone. If you don't have a womb like me, actually, a lot of the evidence is that estrogen has actually lowers my risk of developing breast cancer. But, you know, the research goes further in the book, Estrogen Matters. What he's saying in there, Dr. Avram's saying in there, is that actually it's not that we will develop this cancer because of HRT. It's because for some women, the HRT will perhaps speed up that cancer and that they will be detected earlier, which actually, in some senses, is a good thing. There are all sorts of other issues that he discusses in this book, and you know, it'd be wonderful if I could interview him at some point. But I know that Dr. Louise Newson, on her the menopause doctor, she's interviewed him already on Instagram. So if you want to, you can go and actually listen to him on there and what he has to say about that. So when I started looking at topical estrogen, that was when I began to look at the figures for a general estrogen to try and replace this huge lack of estrogen that I've had, particularly since I was 45. Although I've got my ovaries, that removal of my womb would have pushed me quicker into the menopause. I began to really get my head around it and think, you know, why am I so reluctant to replace something that actually is not only going to relieve my symptoms for now, make the quality of my life better for now, but is actually going to make my quality of life better for the future? Because what we do know, and the people that are in the know about this, is that estrogen, the withdrawal of estrogen, puts us more at risk of heart disease, of cancer, other cancers, of osteoporosis, which is the breaking down of the bones. So your bones become softer and more bony, more porous. And, you know, although having a hip fracture sounds like it's just a bit of an inconvenience, you know, for elderly women, falling and having a hip fracture actually is real end-of-life stuff. A lot of women do not recover from that, and if they do, they might well end up in a wheelchair. Quality of life is gone. And, you know, a lot of women in later years will be dead within a year of a hip fracture. So it's not as simple as just breaking a bone, you know, falling off your bike. So there are lots of reasons. You know, I've been saying for years that after menopause, I've known for a long time, because, you know, one of my big passions apart from the gut is the heart. You know, I'm doing a series of webinars and Zoom interactions where, you know, teaching people how I keep my heart healthy, how I reversing my biological age, keeping my arteries flexible. You know, I'm really interested in heart health. And I've known for many, many years that post-menopausal, the risk of women having a heart attack becomes more than for men. Before menopause, men are more at risk, slightly. But after menopause, women are more at risk. And this is because of the beneficial effects of estrogen. So even though I was saying that, I wasn't actually listening to my own advice and really understanding that what I needed to be able to do was to do the whole picture, not only to reverse my biological age with, certain semi-essential amino acids, but actually how could I protect my whole body as well as my heart by really looking at what I needed to do in terms of this estrogen withdrawal. So I hope that's helped. One of the big things that this menopause podcast is aimed to do is to inform you, but also to give you hope that actually you don't have to put up with any of this stuff, that there is help for you, that you are not alone, and that you may never have even mentioned this. And I'm sure that your mums and grandmothers, will never have actually talked about it. You might have heard somebody say, oh, I'm going to the doctors because I've got a bit of an itch, and what really irritates me is, the programs or the adverts on the TV that are saying, oh, go to your local pharmacy if you've got a bit of an itch down there. I can kid you not, it is much more than a bit of an itch. And actually the topical things that they are suggesting contain all sorts of things that you wouldn't put on your face or your lips, and so you need to stay away from your vagina. And one of the things that you need to be really careful about is taking advice about what to use. And this is some of the things that we'll be talking about, the safe products that don't have the additives that are likely to cause irritation. Every woman is different, of course, but it's really important that you, if you can, get help and a proper diagnosis with this, so that you're not doing too much self-treatment. But that if you do decide to try some creams out, that you're using things that are the purest that you can find, that have the potential for doing the least kind of irritating damage to you. So thank you for listening to the Radiant Menopause today. I hope that this has been a little bit enlightening for you, and that you now know that it's definitely light at the end of the tunnel for you if you're like me, that things can get better, that there is always a solution. It may take you a little while to find out what works for you, but that, as a midlife woman, you might have heard people saying in their 50s when you were young, I don't have sex at 50. And, when you get to 50, you begin to understand why women were going off sex. Partly it's to do with the fact that their estrogen and progesterone and testosterone levels are dropping, but a lot of it is to do because it was, frankly, impossible, uncomfortable at least, impossible at best. And so what we want to be able to do is to address those things. And there are still women who, even with treatment, will never be able to have penetrative sex. But one of the things I am going to do is I've got an interview lined up with the Bare Naked coach, who is a sex, she's actually an ex-nurse as well. I love her. She's American. She's really, really knowledgeable. She's been on all sorts of posh American shows, and I'm absolutely can't wait to interview her. And she's talking about how we can have a meaningful and fulfilling relationship with a partner, whether that's a woman or a man, even with something like vaginal dryness and low libido. So watch out for that episode, and I will see you or hear from, or talk to you really soon. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.